Okay, you're now live.
Thank you. Right, welcome to the Regen and Housing Scrutiny Review Board for the 25th of January, which is scheduled from the 17th. We do have a number of apologies this evening. Just give us those apologies.
Councillor West has sent her apologies. Councillor Khan may be attending, but he'll make every effort to attend, but he's not arrived as yet. And Councillor Tester said he'll be late.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so late items to be introduced by the chair. I think it is important that we acknowledge the recent positive news we've had around the Assembly Room site, alongside the ongoing works of the Market Hall and of course the Beckett Way performance venue. Will transform the look and feel and offer of the city centre, so that's a real bonus. We welcome the LUF funding for the Assembly Rooms, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. Are there any other comments around that? Any questions around that we need to be put into Cabinet? Any concerns raised? Just see it as a positive. It's unanimously a positive then for this particular meeting. Okay. So other than that, any declarations of interest? No. So minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of October. Are there any comments, questions? Can I have a vote and a seconder for those minutes?
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Pandy and Councillor Holmes. So update on the proposed item 5, then is the update on the proposed new A52 junction and Link Road South Derby growth zone, and we have Chris Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. So the purpose of the report is to update the board on progress in relation to the new A50 junction and Link Road, which is part of the wider South Derby growth zone. The recommendation is to accept the report and to note the next steps and the action. The reason, first and foremost, is obviously the board has requested an update on the project, but more than that, it's obviously quite an important strategic project, very important for the city. I've actually been working personally on the project for 7 years. Not all of those 7 years, obviously, but a large proportion of them. The second project started with Derby, a very big project for me personally as well. Supporting information. So the South Derby growth zone is the name given to the wider area south of the city, extending into South Derbyshire, with the A50 as kind of the bottom kind of boundary of that kind of site. It includes the strategic housing allocation of Radley Way, which is intended for nearly 2,000 homes. It also includes a proposed allocation at Lowes Farm, which is within South Derbyshire. That's optioned by a major house builder. Not allocated for housing yet, but certainly likely to come forward. Potential up to 4,500 homes. It also includes Infinity Park Derby, which is the city's flagship regeneration project. It includes the extension into South Derbyshire. And since 2017, it's included Infinity Garden Village, which is one of the government's new garden villages. 14 announced that year, more announced subsequently. So alongside everything else, also the infrastructure, it's important that we deliver a garden village as part of this proposal. So very important. And if anybody's got any questions, by the way, feel free to stop me as I go.
We deliver garden village. Is council delivering the garden village?
It's a partnership approach. So I'll come on to partners a little bit later, but it is a partnership approach, and Homes England very much kind of working alongside us in relation to that as well. So the garden village concept, as I'm sure most of you know, goes right on back to 19th century kind of notions of garden villages. Things like Welling Garden City came forward, things like Bourneville. So the government's kind of revisited that as a matter of policy when 2017, I think it was, the white paper on the housing market, fixing our broken housing market. The government recognised that garden villages are a key means of delivering new housing. So Homes England and the government started to devote more energies and funding to bring forward those garden villages, and we were fortunate enough to be allocated as a garden. does bring with it certain responsibilities. We can't just deliver, box standard housing estate. It has to be more than.
So government funding coming to the council and council is spending in partnership.
Yes, so the council has had a significant amount of what we call capacity funding from Homes England in the region of close to £1 million. We've also used business rates relief towards the costs as well. So that money has been used essentially towards the delivery of the planning application for the junction and the essential infrastructure, because this is such a complex project that it does take a lot of money to deliver those things.
I think just to be clear, this sits slightly outside of our zone, doesn't our borders, if you like. So it's a linked project with Derby South, South Derbyshire, sorry, and Derby City.
Yeah.
It isn't just all Derby City. It sits on the border, if you like, on the project just over the border.
I mean, I'll talk a little bit more later on in the report about that, but yeah, just for those purposes. So the city very much depends on South Derbyshire and also Amber Valley housing market area partners for its housing needs. So whilst the bulk of this will be outside the city very much depends on South Derbyshire and this particular housing project to meet its housing needs as well. There's also an opportunity here, which we haven't really had in the past, to deliver more affordable housing. The relationship with South Derbyshire hasn't been the best in terms of delivering affordable housing, but they have been quite open with this to say, actually, there's an opportunity for the city to influence housing options in relation to affordable housing as well.
On our border.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So obviously, you've got
we'll take it as a positive
obligations as well.
Can I ask something else?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah, sure.
I remember reading about this garden village maybe around 7 to 8 years ago.
It was 2017. Was the first announcement. So we put a bid in along with South Derbyshire July 2016. Yeah.
But when has it moved until now?
There's been a lot of work.
There's been a lot of effort behind the scenes. I think it's fair to say. I mean, the planning application in particular, because it's such a complex application, it does take a long time to work its way through the planning system. The bulk of the housing in the city side, so 130 homes at Radley Way, are consented and built. There's another 50 on the city side that's still to be built. But the remainder is for the sector.
Chair, at 4.8, we're talking about obviously a fantastic levelling upfront bid, one of the largest.
The biggest in the programme.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant news again for Derby. In terms of the 50-50, so the 50-50 split between the private sector and 3 local authorities, then it goes on to say collaboration agreement, and then shortly the split of the 50%, the risk element of that 50% is to be agreed. Obviously, it's quite complex because you've got lots of different sort of 3 authorities, different footprints, but there's going to be revenue, business rates, and also council tax that's going to be split wherever the land lies. Is that all in the mix in terms of who takes the biggest risk? Because the biggest gains should surely be the biggest risk in terms of that split as well, in terms of the local authorities. Or am I being naive that that's part of the way that this will be worked out?
No, you're certainly not being naive. I think it's fair to say that this particular project, the bulk of the benefit won't be felt in the city. It will be South Derbyshire. But as has happened with the likes of Markham Vale, where it took a new junction off the M1 to help bring forward the benefits of Markham Vale, what it will help to do is to accelerate the development of Infinity Park, which will obviously bring forward business rates. The bulk of the housing we've already got radically away, unfortunately, but yeah, it will certainly help to bring forward those kind of business rates. There's certainly no inclination that the city will split the business rates obviously within South Derbyshire within this particular project.
But there's obviously outside of direct revenue. Clearly, there's lots of benefits there. The other thing that I will ask again in 4.8 and 4.9, it talks about this is in principle. So obviously we're keen and I'm keen to make sure that we get this over the line. So it says this will be resolved soon, or you know, any idea on the time frame to actually sort of get this kind of the I's dotted and the T's crossed, so we can get this formalised? Any idea of the time?
Yeah, so I've come from a meeting this afternoon with the project partners led by the county, where they said that the outline business case is ready to submit now to DFT and DLUC, so that will be going certainly in the next few weeks. From then, the county will procure the construction contractor. It's a design and build contract, so they'll be designing and building the scheme through the Midlands Highways Alliance framework. That should be in April. I think it's highlighted in the report. We're just about to take a report to Cabinet on the 15th of February with next steps. The county's already done that, but then they're also going back to their cabinet in March to talk about the CPO resolution to get that signed off. So in the background, we've got a twin track approach. So the county and the city have always maintained that we potentially need a CPO approach, but the county is also working with the land referencing agent to work with the landowners to try and get those agreements in place without the need for a CPO. All that means, with a fair wind, that if we get the land agreements in place in time, and the business case could be signed off at the back end of summer this year, with a start on site around that same time. That requires, obviously, not to have to use CPO, because the minute we have to use CPO, as the county does, time frames out.
I'm just going to let Ian come in first, Councillor Pandy, and then we'll come back to you, because I think it's in relation to this, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, the February Cabinet report will bottom that risk that you were talking about, so that will set out the share of those risks. And we're not quite ready to share that today, but certainly the February Cabinet report will cover that. Thank you, Chair.
So as Councillor Holmes stated, that there are multi-parties involved in this, so who would be the overall in charge, because there's so many people involved, who would have the, you know, the authority to take decisions and going forward?
Yeah, who's taking the lead on it?
Yeah, the county council will be the accountable body for the levelling up funding, so they will have responsibility for that. But as far as things like technical approval goes, anything that's within the city boundary, the city council will still have responsibility for. So things like highways, works, any kind of infrastructure, utilities, all of the infrastructure that's required for the delivery of the project, it will still be technical sign off within the city.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right, if you want to go through this in a bit more detail, and then we'll hold off questions to the end of
Yeah, so I've talked through 4.1. So 4.2 just gives an image from the master plan. It's the private sector that actually leads on the master planning work. Commercial partner, Wilson Bowden, employed a consultant to lead on that. We've already talked a little bit about the benefits. It's important to know that without this essential infrastructure, the 280 homes will be able to be brought forward. So 180 homes in the city, 100 in the South Derbyshire, and both planning departments, both ourselves and South Derbyshire, will always maintain that stance very firmly. So in terms of the planning, the junction and link road have planning consent already some time ago. It's also important to note that currently a new outline application is within the system for the wider Infinity Park development, and all of these activities are obviously to dovetail the South Derby growth zone, Infinity Park Derby, and there are various developments that the Regeneration team is working on as well with the commercial partners around this. In fact, I've just been made aware of a new one today as well with Rolls-Royce potentially. So all of those planning applications will need to do a little bit more work to understand, the implications for the traffic network, Section 106, and other obligations of the council. The partners, we've talked a little bit about partners already. The public sector partners are ourselves, the County Council, South Derbyshire. Private sector, you've got Wilson Bowden, who are part of the Barrow David Wilson Homes Group as well. So they're also invested in terms of housing and development as part of that. Hallam Land, who are a land promoter, they're not a house builder as such, they're a land promoter, they're the residential partner. And then we've been working closely with landowners as well. We're aware of a number of landowners and had several meetings, and the county's having meetings with the landowners with their land referencing agents. The new governance structure is still very much in a state of flux. It has changed from time to time. It is outlined there. So the intention is to have I think it was initially going to be called a joint growth board. I think that terminology has slightly changed to a collaboration board. But essentially, as you see, that structure is pretty much the same. And there'll be a number of different subgroups within that. I've been talking to Link in Highways today about having a transport subgroup sat underneath all of this as well. So that structure really should remain the same, even if it's called something slightly different. The next bit just goes on to talk about levelling up, which we've also spoken about. One of the things that will stem from the Cabinet report is that we'll be asking for delegated authority to enter into collaboration agreements. And some of the collaboration agreements and the responsibilities of the council are outlined here. The main aim really is to help the county council to deliver the infrastructure as the accountable body and as the project lead. So all of this is really geared towards helping county council to deliver the project and making sure that obviously we discharge our responsibilities as well. As Ian mentioned, there will be a provision around how we meet any cost overruns and how we meet the upfront risk of abortive costs, which could be quite high, but actually we think the risk is quite low. DFT certainly is not usually, as far as I'm aware, Nigel might correct me if I'm wrong, but asked for clawback of money that's been spent front on schemes. To my understanding, that actually is quite small.
Not generally, there's very limited risk of that, particularly if you've got massive capital support funding. It's very challenging the creation of the scheme.
And in terms of the estimate as well, although it was some time ago that we put the levelling up front bid in, we've had initial estimates back from the potential contractor for the design and build contract, and we still think we're comfortably within budget. We allowed something like 25% in terms of risk and inflation in the original bid, and we're still well within estimate. That's my understanding. Again, that could change. We're still working on the business case, as I said, hopefully by the end of this summer. Finalise that, but we do think we're still within budget. Just talking about next steps there, to supporting the county to finalise the business case, to enter into the collaboration agreements, delegation of the council's own powers in relation to Highways Works and CPO. We've got powers within our constitution to do that. Some of this I've already talked about as well in terms of making the CPO resolution, procuring the contractor. The levelling up fund time frame, provisionally to the end of March 2025, which does leave us very tight. We do have the possibility, or the county does, to request an extension to that to March 2026. And I think, given that it's the biggest project in the programme, given how complex it is, I'm sure they will be asking that question. Hopefully, I don't think we'll have a problem with that extension. So I touched briefly on Section 106 obligations earlier. It's the responsibility of the developers to deliver a primary school as part of this. That's laid out within the local plan. The DFE has also provided funding for a secondary school, and we're just working through with the county the design elements around that as well. Talked about Section 106 and affordable housing. That given that we've got a big chunk of public money going into this, we'd certainly hope to be close to policy level compliance on affordable housing. There'll also be a new health centre called the Cabell Centre, which will be in the Symphony District Centre. And apologies if anybody wants, I can always update people after the meeting. I've not been particularly close to that for some time. Certainly in development. So those are some of the key elements that will come from the Section 106. The junction and the link road are the main means of highways infrastructure, but we probably expect there'll be some needs for more localised highways improvements as well. So I'm sure that'll come out of section 106 obligations as well. In terms of engagement with the public and stakeholders, the principal means has been through the Infinity Garden Village Liaison Group, which is member-led, led by South Derbyshire, head of their Environmental and Planning Committee, but it's also had representation from Sinfin ward councillors and also members as well. There was also quite a lot of consultation done as part of the plan application process, obviously, so quite a bit of the county has in relation to that. In terms of other options, there isn't really another option because obviously it's such a significant, up to 4,500 homes, nearly 3.5 million square feet of employment floor space additional to what we've already got, 5,000 new jobs. So it's not really an option to do nothing, and this really is the minimum, and you know it's the only option available to us. Really,
to waste the opportunity will be at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the financial 7.1, obviously onwards, Councillor Holmes, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say that in 4.11 you spoke about 106 and the anticipated other obligations. In primary school, you know, I think that's taken in most developments. And but what's really good here is the new secondary school. I think that's what residents really are asking for here is clear, you know, a clear direction of travel in terms of secondary school places in the area. And obviously, it's not just for Derby City, but there is one desperately needed in that area of the city. So that's brilliant news. And also health provision as well. It's another thing that we all, I mean, myself as a Mickleover ward councillor, the impact of new housing, whether it be on the boundary of the city nearby or within Derby City itself, we're seeing, you know, significant impact, as well as we're all living older as well, which is good news. But it puts pressure on our GP surgeries and medical centres. So again, to see that investment is excellent. And also the environmental, the biodiversity net gain, 10% net gain. That's good to see as well. To see a development which will involve lots of some green space, etc., to have that element in there to ensure that there is a net gain in terms of biodiversity is welcome too. So, you know, there's some really real positives, not just about the local economy, jobs, houses, affordable housing, but actually infrastructure, which is absolutely key to gaining public support really for these kind of things. Is they need to see that infrastructure to go alongside this significant regeneration project, whether it be well, in this case mixed, but that's something which is very welcome, Jen.
And I can probably add to that as well that yeah, the regeneration team is working on an area for flood storage, and as part of that, you know, compensation for that could include an additional land take, which would serve as a potential extension to Sinfin More Local Nature Reserve, which could be well used. So I'll also report on that in the future.
Okay, fantastic. So going back to 7.1 and the financials, obviously the figures are all there for us. Did you want to talk anything through that or answer, or would you prefer me to go to questions?
Just said earlier, really, provisions will follow from having split the overall. So that I've been reporting on those figures for some time.
Sorry, I'll come to you in a moment. So I think the one of the ones that sort of jumps out at me is the inflation. Yeah. And you know, we have to be open, honest and transparent with all these things. Are we confident in the figures that are in here, or when was this last revisited in terms of the current inflation pressures? So we county had what we call an early contractor involvement with the contractor through the framework, doing the design and build contract, and the estimates that come back initially from the contractor are still well within budget. So we're confident that we've allowed enough for inflation and risk.
Chair, really following on from that, I mean, a 25% risk pot, very significant. So obviously that gives you significant well, it should, subject to the cabinet report, giving some more detail, confidence that there is headroom here. And, you know, with the inflation, obviously more or less half of that as well. They're big figures, but I think they're realistic. And it's good to see that there's a there is a realization that those kind of elements do need to be in a project of this size. But I'd be interested. I'm sure the cabinet will be as well to actually to delve into what those risks actually are that lie behind. 10 million pounds risk pot is a very significant amount of money. So it'd be interesting to see how you perceive that to be broken up. I mean, obviously there's some risks which are unforeseen. But I think it gives us confidence really that there is a lot of headroom there.
It does, and there is a more detailed risk register sat behind this, and obviously a more detailed construction risk register will be developed as we go along as well. The other thing to note is that the consultants working with the county council, partners that we've worked with extensively before, including me personally on highways projects, so they are very close to projects like this. They know the area. I've worked with QS before as well, so I'm pretty confident that in terms of budget, there's a lot of money to.
I mean, Chair, the thing that I've been involved in the past in the A52 project and picking that up after the issues that the council had, so it is so important to be absolutely realistic and to ensure that the budget is there to complete a project first time round without issues. So again, just to say, it's good to see that figure there, and I think more detail is going to be interesting to read about.
Councillor Pandy, before we move on.
So any timelines being set for all these projects to be delivered, because there are so many going on at the same time? Garden Village, when they come, like realistically, then.
Yeah, so I mean that's an interesting question, because obviously there's highways works going on around the network, and I mean Nigel might be on spot, but might be a little bit better placed to me. But there are works obviously planned on the A38. In the news over the last week, they've been talking about the A50 corridor and the A500 corridor more generally as a really important strategic part of the network. So there will be different works planned over the network, and it would be important that the different highways authorities, like national highways as well, work together to make sure those works can be delivered in tandem and not too much local disruption.
So, do you have for Garden Village? It will be ready by then. It will be ready by maybe 2025.
The Garden Village itself, obviously, the housing project is a 20-30 year project. When you think about the traditional kind of build rates, it hasn't really improved very much. Most house builders now operate a home a week. That's the reality of it, and it's not in their interest really to lease houses any quicker than that, because obviously their prices go down, the more housing they release. So
desperate need for housing across the whole of the country.
there is. Yeah. But and as I said earlier, we are in a position, I think, to influence affordable housing development more here, which we could potentially deliver quickly.
2026 is the sort of potential for the actual work, the A52 works, with the hope that will bring on the Garden Village by the 2030s is the sort of aim target of.
Yeah, the first housing should be delivered, not too far after the completion of the highways routes, but say it's 20-year program really. Unless and until the land promoter gets more kind of house builders on board, that might start to increase delivery rates. It's usual on the site of this size to have 2 or 3 kind of house builders on board.
So obviously the next couple of points are, I think Councillor Henry picked one, a bit of the climate implications as well, and the legal implications. Did you want to talk us through the legal first and the climate, and then we have a lovely new one on there, social economic implications.
Yeah, nice start.
Which is a start.
Absolutely. So I've touched on some of the legal implications earlier, which are around the collaboration agreements. The council delegating its CPO and highways powers to the county. So that'll be, as I said, the subject of the cabinet report on the 15th of February. I'm just in the process of finalising that now. I've worked quite closely with John Turner and Legals to bring this kind of development forward and to get this agreed. It's the county's intention to sign those agreements as soon as possible, so really by the end of Feb. So they're the prime legal implications. We've touched a little bit about clawback, potential clawback of funding. We do think it's a fairly low risk. Yes, the council potentially could be liable for any overruns, but our first port of call would always be government and other funding sources before we went back to government to ask for additional money.
Okay. The climate implications we touched on.
Got a question there, Gerald.
Yep.
So on that, forgive me for not probably interpreting this right, but the last sentence in 9.1, the project is also anticipated to utilise a lot of council resources. Now, I'm assuming that because it's under climate implications. Well, I'm not assuming anything actually. I'm asking the question. What does that sentence mean?
It's because really the climate change tool indicates that a lot of resources will be kind of used from the council. So I've kind of, it's difficult to try and pull together all of the bits from the tool in one paragraph. So I've kind of tried to do that. But, you know, for instance, the housing team will be significantly involved, the regeneration team, highways, other technical approvals, environmental services, that they will be involved, legal services. So it can, a project like this can suck up a lot of council resource over a period of time. In some ways, that's good because potentially, you know, the council can recover some of its own costs through that. So we've attempted to recover as much costs as possible through a capital grant that we've had from Homes England, which I haven't talked about actually. We had we managed to secure 800k of capital money from Homes England, which we've been able to use this year towards the project, but it has meant that we've got to capitalise some salaries against them as well. Requested some of that move forward to next year to do the same. So yeah, it does mean that a lot of council departments can be involved in size.
So just to follow on from that, so why is it, again, this is why I'm confused. Why is it in climate implications? I mean, obviously resources, people doing the job, that there are climate implications to everything that we do. However, why is it specifically in there? Surely that would be in sort of financials or some other. Yeah, I don't know. I was just suggesting it confused me being added specifically to climate implications. So I don't know, maybe maybe that could be sort of pulled out and maybe explained a little better for people like me who don't understand what you mean. I don't know. It's just a suggestion.
I take your point, Councillor Holmes. Yeah, I mean, it's just that it just jumped out at me from the appraisal tool.
Yeah. Okay.
It could easily have gone in significant implications as well.
So that does raise a couple of questions for me as well, if I may.
Yeah, cool.
Obviously you talked about the internal resources and the pressure that might put on us, on other departments across the council.
Yeah.
Have we got concerns that will impact on any other projects or planning or issues in the city itself that may cause delays elsewhere? And on top of that, in terms of the finances of that, is there an element of charge that we can put against this project as well, or is there another way of making sure that this project doesn't impact on the day-to-day running or other parts of council's growth plans?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a good point, Chair, and that's a discussion definitely we can and should have with the county about the future funding of the projects to the end of this, whether we can recoup more of the council's time within that. In terms of whether it will impact on other council departments, obviously there's always that risk, but I certainly work very closely with other teams within the council, with every other department that's kind of relevant to this. We work very closely with Regeneration Projects Division, who work on a number of projects around us as well. So we try and avoid that where we can. Some crossover is kind of inevitable, you know, and we need to make sure that what we're doing doesn't impact on what Regeneration is doing, for instance, and vice versa. So we talked about the private sector contribution to the project of 6 million. Some of that is being delivered as part of the Western Flood Lagoon works for the Regeneration Projects Division. So I've tried to maintain regular contact with Patrick Middleton from that team to make sure that those two projects are kind of dovetailing and that we're getting the maximum contribution to the private sector, but equally there's no impact on delivery of either project.
Sorry, Chair, sorry to interrupt again. So obviously a huge capital project, but have revenue implications on the council. Is that Has that been factored into the medium-term financial plan in terms of, or will it be just assumed to be absorbed in day-to-day running? Because a project like this is going to take, as it progresses, a significant amount of resources we just talked about, which means revenue pressure or revenue impact. Has that been assessed?
There isn't a revenue pressure as such from staffing. I mean, I've certainly been very careful to make sure all of our costs are covered as part of the project. But going forward, certainly what we usually do with projects like this is we have what's called committed sums to cover the future maintenance of the project, and that's always part of the project costs. So that has been allowed for. We just have to be careful to make sure that that's not swallowed up. You know, if, for instance, there are cost overruns. So we try and allow for future maintenance as well.
Obviously, one of next item or the next part of this report is the social economic implications, and that's something that this board was keen to start to bring in and start to see a bit more positivity around that locally. Can you talk us through that briefly, and then we can ask any questions?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've only just referred to it briefly in the report, so it's important to know that it's going to be a new community within the area, within Sinfield and Stenson Field. So that brings with it pressures which you talked about in relation to section 106, but it also is obviously clearly a positive benefit as well to the city. There's an opportunity, I think, to get other teams more involved, for instance, economic growth, who do a lot of work with contractors and getting people into schools to talk to enterprise for education and things like that. So there's an opportunity there. There's the opportunity around social value in public contracts. So the contract with the contractor will make it clear that they're taking APIs, key forms indicators.
That's something that we've talked about at this board on a number of occasions. Is there a specifics around locality employment, if you like, within that, and where does that fit? Because obviously we're on the border here with Derbyshire and Derby City. Is there a positive impact for the city in terms of what they're looking to achieve?
I think it's a fairly standard term in these kind of contracts that the contractors have to use, you know, local workforces where they can. Obviously, it's a moot point as to how much they can do that, because obviously they're still going to get the right people for the job. But yeah, that's certainly a part of the construction contract. Yeah.
But there's no specifics, as in terms of, you say they should. There's no, you would expect X amount of people involved in this project to be from local and, you know, businesses or local employment or whatever.
Well, it's part of the initial selection process anyway. It's a KPI, so the contractor will be managed and monitored against that. So we'd expect it to at least be delivered some part of that objective against that.
Just that.
Yes,
Under
please.
the MHA contracts, there are some standard clauses on construction skills development. And a project of this scale, you would expect to have trainees set up and established in that process. Maybe even a sort of construction skills, like academy built up around it, because again, the scale of it. So there are all those factors, but also within the MHA, they tend to be locally based contractors, even where they're nationally badged. They're in that sort of Leicester, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire corridor. So all of employment is from that centre.
Which is good news, and I think that's one of the key factors. And actually, you say about training, we have an opportunity here for them to pick up and improve ways of doing things. But I think it is the
industry realises there's a skill shortage,
yes,
right from high level skills down to ground level skills, and it is something that drives inflation in the contracting industry and the construction industry generally. So participating in these programmes is not something to force them to do; it's in their interests.
Yeah.
And that's monitored by the framework boards.
Yeah.
You know, those organised contracts support their performance and thoughts through the framework governance as well.
Which affects their future framework entry.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you've both given me a fantastic answer there. And what I would say is that if we can have some of that detail in future reports, what this is bringing to the city on a bigger scale, rounder view. I think that is what, as a scrutiny board historically, we've been asking and pushing towards, something we're quite keen to focus on. So, okay, and then other significant implications. I think we'll
Just before we move off socio-economic, so
please.
just to know that there will be a separate equality assessment as part of this thing. So, from the previous cabinet report as well, but that's indicated to you.
So other significant implications for construction risk register. LUF bid included a healthy risk cut, which we've already discussed at 25%. And February cabinet report will include a summary of the key risks. Obviously, much of this scheme will be presumably quite financially covered at the moment in terms of businesses, as in the risk. Can't keep my wordings out today. I'm trying to get the terminology for confidential, if you like, in terms of what can be discussed. And there'll be a point once we reach that February where there will be more details of breakdowns of costs, etc. Won't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions on this item? I think we've had a positive meeting, some positive scrutiny, and I hope that helps.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everybody for their input.
Thank you very much. Feel free to stay if you really do want to spend a Wednesday evening enjoying some more council business. Alternative, you may leave. Thank you very much for your time. So item 6 on the agenda is the traffic priorities and Corporation Street. This was something that was asked to be brought to this meeting. I think the councillors who have brought to this meeting unfortunately aren't in attendance today, but we will go through this item. So I think it's been presented by yourselves.
Yeah, if I can do it to have some more detailed questions and see how you go. But I guess the important thing to start with is to say that I've got to take you back to COVID. Sorry, everybody, and take you back to 2020. And if you can remember some of those things that we were trying to tackle at that time, and that we were at a point of crisis where we were making decisions, and were one of the things that government particularly wanted to do was work out how and support local authorities in managing the spaces and places and maintaining that 2 metre distance, and how we were going to operate with that in place. So they created this COVID-19 Emergency Active Travel Fund in response to that. And the idea of that was to create these safe spaces, so where you could walk and cycle and particularly maintain that 2 metre distance, which is very challenging really when on some of our footways, isn't it? So so this was it was in a number of tranches, but this was the first tranche, and the government did that using special emergency powers. So and that meant that we didn't have to go through a full business case to put something in. It was very much about trial and test. And we could forego things like the normal consultation processes that you would expect. So government were putting in under those emergency powers, and it was a massively short time scale, wasn't it? It was incredibly challenging. They released it in I think it was May 2020, and then we had to submit our proposals by the June. It was literally sort of a week's turnaround. And again, because of that, it was really, you were testing through implementation. It wasn't that we got something there ready in advance. The expectation was they wouldn't necessarily have that fully operational. We put it on the ground as quickly as we could. By the time we got the announcement of the funding, we had to start within 4 weeks and had to complete within 8. So it was really, it really was quick, and what government really wanted to see was, could we see the impact quickly? Could they see it on the ground? So the Corporation Street traffic restrictions were part of the proposals we put forward under that funding round. And really the focus of it was, again, to create this safer spaces for pedestrians and cyclists, but also with this scheme in particular was to support through traffic and to improve journey times for public transport. And I guess the one thing is that's probably obvious from a road space point of view. If you haven't got it filled with cars, buses are going to get through quicker. But one of the other things that may be less obvious is that congestion through Morlidge and Corporation Street had an indirect impact on how the bus station then operates. So actually taking out those through traffic had a big impact on the bus station itself, as well as making it a quieter environment, which I hope you would imagine and think. Certainly when I walk out there, it's a much more pleasant space to be in, which was absolutely what the funding was there for. So because it was done quickly, as I've said, we did it under an experimental traffic regulation order, and that was in by about August, the summer of 2020. And that was the restrictions were from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in both directions, but access was kept for buses and taxis. And we did at that early stage put a camera in, but there was no enforcement. What we were doing was issuing warnings to drivers. And that experimental TRO, I said at the beginning that these experimental measures meant you waived consultation, but because we'd gone down this process of having an experimental TRO, then it meant we could have consultation at the same time. So actually we did more than we were expected of us. So, and that was open until November 2021. So we had a long period where people could comment and make their voices heard around this particular restriction. And we only had 6 objections. So, you know, while certainly the impact of the scheme was noisy, it attracted a lot of media attention, requests for FOIs, all those sorts of things that you might expect. At the same time, you know, we didn't get a lot of public objection to it. In fact, some people said you need to enforce it now. There were complaints about the signal, you know, the signage around the restriction, and I think that came up a few times. And certainly we did improve it over the time of that experimental period. So there is a lot of signage out there now, more than we would standardly be expected to provide. And actually we've now tested that. So we've had some challenges. And so the Traffic and Parking Tribunal we've taken 2 cases through there, and they have confirmed that the signage is suitable and more than adequate. So that was, you know, that was very reassuring for us. 4.7 details probably the bit you're most interested in all the PCNs that have been issued since we crossed the duration of the scheme. And while we don't have massively reliable, you know, crystal clear pre-scheme traffic volumes, and obviously they've changed massively. Who knows what normal is still, really, even since COVID. That certainly you can see that it's quite clear that numbers are declining, and that you will know that from being out there on the street. I guess you know, we said that the part of the scheme was to support journey times for buses, and I would say this scheme has had overwhelming support from the bus operators. They love it, and I think it's quite obvious to you that why they would. It's removed some of that daily grind through this particular part of the city centre, but again, I come back to that point about the bus station, which I'm sure Nigel may have more technical detail on, but it means that the vehicles aren't standing and waiting. It means that they can move around the concourse much more effectively. So we're getting better roll-on, roll-off times in the actual bus station itself. And there are opportunities. Now we've done this scheme and it's been successful. We can now look at Phoenix Street. We'll be doing further works on Victoria and Albert Street under the Transforming Cities Fund, and create a wider benefit to that whole area. So the whole of that the space in that big space in the city centre will be a much more pleasant place, and have that permeability we're always talking about, or we're starting to talk about a lot more from the city centre, in how people move about it and how it's a better place to get along. I guess I've said around, you know, we had stakeholder engagement because we had this long experimental period with the traffic regulation order. All the funding was certainly paid for from the government funding to implement it. And I guess from an environmental benefit, we've seen the environment is more pleasant for people to move around. Obviously, you know, we don't have exact figures on there, but we would expect that the air quality and the environment around that street has had benefit, because you're not getting vehicles idling while they're waiting in congested queues. So all in all, I would say it's been, you know, from what the scheme set out to do, it has achieved. Anything else to add?
I think the only thing to point out is that like Albert Street and Victoria Street, which was also set up. Street was also in the thought process for transforming cities. So they didn't just come from nowhere. Back the Emergency Active Travel allowed us to do new things that maybe we'd not thought of, but also encouraged us, if we'd got anything on can develop, bring it forward rapidly and test it. So that's why the two forward.
Okay, so there's I think just from my sort of view, before I go to any questions, I think, you know, as we start to see the return of use of public transport, we know that there's been a massive decline since COVID, and you know, as we start to get more bus routes and coming through the city, and hopefully one more regular to Spondon would be nice, please. But you know, in terms of that, I can only see it as a positive to keep it, an encouragement to keep the city moving, to keep it, and the environmental impacts are massive on that front. You know, hopefully, with not only does it help the environmental impact outside of this building, but actually, as we look at more people using the transport because it's more reliable, it creates a knock-on effect of having less cars on the roads, etc., etc. So there's that bigger picture to look at. I think we know that there will always be negativity around this, and you've touched on some of the comments that have been made externally, but in terms of the positives versus the negatives outweighing, I think this is part of how most cities are moving. You know, we've got to get to the point where we do have less physical transport, and I can see as I'm looking out the window now a bike crossing over and coming down this road, and that's really positive to see. It's not just vehicle upon vehicle upon vehicle, and it will have an impact on everybody. So are there any other questions, challenges to this?
Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Panda?
This is staying there. The scheme is staying for.
Yeah, the scheme went from experimental to permanent in 2020. Transitional costs of making it permanent were covered by transforming cities funds. But just to reinforce your point, tried to do some figures with some old data, and old data said, you know, the traffic is very different. People start to be looking at around about 500 vehicles going through Corporation Street in both directions. Historic. So pre the experimental scheme, so pre August 2022, pre-pandemic, that's intensified in the peak times, particularly in one direction, bypassing the ring road, so coming in from Derby Street Bridge and Fall Street, going out through more directly. So the intensification of that pushes it to about 600 vehicles now. So with all the crossings and the signals that will be obviously now that included buses, taxis, and private cars. If we look at what we've got going through now as a rough count, including the taxis that are going through in limited vehicles, it's about 10 to 50
per hour.
So it really changed it. So although the non-compliant figures are genuinely higher than likely to be, we put restrictions in, you know, for the purposes of restriction. They're still higher than we would like them to be, but they're falling. But the actual aggregate change is massive. The environment, the use of the market square, how the market square can be used.
Absolutely, and that's only going to be brought, as we spoke about earlier, with the positivity of having a successful bid again from government onto the assembly rooms. This is it's almost a pre-planned, which is novel for Derby City, if I have to say so myself.
Because it's dissuading a lot more people from using Fall Street.
Yes.
It changes that you can deal with the footprint of that development, how the frontage of that development.
Absolutely.
It changes the cathedral green aspect.
Yeah.
It's in making a cathedral reach to each other. So it's got knock-on implications to benefit, you know, quieter area for for traffic.
and a safer area for people to use both sides of the city. And that's something that this city's been, you know, businesses and this business and people have been saying for a long time, is that this side of the city isn't as footfall wise as the Derbian, get that correct, from the last 3 name changes. But, you know, and I think this is a part of bringing that change of area, if you like, that ability to create a new social environment, an evening environment and things, bring back the many clubs that we used to have in the 90s and then the noughties, and create a bit more of an evening feel for the city, and bring that back. So I do think it has its challenges, and I think there has been a lot of negativity, but I do see the overall impact as a positive. And I think generationally, as we move forward, because once it's been the case for so long, a lot of the time it's change. I remember when, well, I don't think I do remember when St. Peter Street used to have, no, maybe not, I might have not been that old, but there was, you know, we look back at St. Peter Street and had vehicles through it, you know, in the last 50 years. And, you know, this, as we get to this stage, you know, we've got to start looking at all the options. And this, to me, is the obvious next step as city centres become more.
And it touched on Phoenix Street in passing as well. The importance of Phoenix Street is that historically that's protected the city from back across the city centre.
Yes.
From basically Chester Green through the city centre, bypassing the traffic flow.
Yeah.
With this restriction, we can now look at Phoenix Street restriction differently, at least on the inbound direction, how junction on the inbound side. And that changes the accessibility and maybe its attractiveness as regeneration.
Yes.
Because
yeah,
the
absolutely.
riverside area is not easy to get into, so it opens up a form of access without risking on traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never used that rat one. Never. Okay. I think that's it for questions. Any more? Councillor Pandy?
Like you mentioned, the negative press and the FOIs, you know, it talks about fines being generated by that particular camera. How do these the fines they get used in terms of revenue?
So the total fine is basically unapplicated. And that's the same from bus lanes and sort of traffic, well, certainly parking related and restriction related PCNs. So it goes into the highways pot. So it's basically helping to across the whole highways piece, whether that's in road safety terms, obviously the first call is in road systems. And it also goes to support things like highway network development, pothole fixing. So it generally goes into highways as part of the type application.
The message from this council has always been, we don't want to fine people, so don't use it. You know, the less that's the message, isn't it? It's not about getting fines in. I'd certainly prefer that there's not a single penny comes in from there, but ultimately there will be people that always don't follow the rules. So there we go. Okay, I'm going to move on then, unless we've got any more questions. I don't know if you've got, sorry. I have to lock myself out of the computer because I was so enthralled and involved in the conversation. May not be able to get back in. There we are. Okay, so next on the agenda is, and again, thank you very much for your time. Feel free to stay for the rest of the meeting should you wish to be deeply involved with many, many other aspects of this council. Otherwise, you are free to leave. Thank you very much. Home energy improvements that DCC are funding in homes. It's our good friend Ian Fulliger, who I think has been at every meeting that I have ever been at. So carry on, Mr. Fulliger.
Thank you, Chair. And tonight I've got Henry Sipser, and Henry is the team manager for our home energy improvements. And Henry knows a lot more than me about this sort of stuff. So technical questions.
I have some technical questions relating to my own house energy and how to make improvements, but we'll talk later.
Henry's, yes. But as you know, Chair, our homes are a major source of CO2 emissions within in the UK. And in acknowledgement of that, the government, since 2020, have introduced a series of bidding rounds for local authorities to bid into, to receive money to deliver retrofit home energy improvements, both to privately owned homes, to a lesser extent, to some extent, privately rented homes, and indeed council stock and housing association stock as well. Those initial schemes were called LAD 1, LAD 2, LAD 3. So LAD is local authority delivery, and we bid for each one of those funding sources, and that's enabled us to spend around about £2.5 million. The report talks about a figure of 1.8, which was the spend at the time it was drafted. Certainly by the end of March, we think spend will be about £2.5 million, and that will have improved 150 within the private sector chair. In addition to that, we've got a new scheme called HUG, and that stands for Home Upgrade Grant, and we've been given a provisional allocation of £2.3 million for the HUG scheme, and that will help us to improve a further 150 homes with that scheme. And through the LAD, what we have typically targeted is the very worst properties within the city. So these are properties that are typically non-traditionally built. Certainly they've got solid wall construction. We've targeted a lot of the Wimpy No Fines non-traditional construction properties in the Mackworth area. And then when I get on to what Derby Homes are doing, they're concentrating on more non-traditional homes in the southern side of the city. So that's the LAD scheme. In terms of HUG, we'll be concentrating on properties that are off-grid. So those properties that don't have a gas supply to them, they're typically heated through electric radiators, and the design of that scheme is to help those homes. It can help things like park homes as well, which, as you know, Chair, we've got our own park home site as well. So that's those two schemes. In addition to that, there's been a funding source, the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. That's been made available for councils to improve their own properties, and we have worked jointly with Derby Homes to bid in for that scheme. Through the first round of that, Derby Homes have led the works and have improved 85 properties. Again, they're concentrating on their worst stock. It's these non-traditionally built homes, cast iron construction. So they've done 85, and they've been given a provisional allocation in the next round, which they would have to deliver by the end of March 24, and that would support 153 homes, Chair. And then we also issue advice, or rather we refer homeowners, private renters who are seeking advice through to the experts. And in this case, we refer homeowners onto the Warmer Derby and Derbyshire Advice Energy. We do a lot of that through our Healthy Housing Hub, which helps and supports vulnerable people, typically older people, but any household that is deemed to be vulnerable, we'll go in, actually sit down with them. In some cases, we'll help them switch energy supply, and our officers will be in the living room helping them do the IT to do that. But certainly then we'll pass them on to the home energy experts in terms of advice. And then the final thing that we talked about, Chair, in the report is these energy company obligations. And this is where the government requires the major energy providers to put, in effect, a pot of money aside so that local contractors can bid in and deliver home energy improvement works using that contribution from the major providers. There's one scheme called ECO, and that's where the contractors, the liaise directly with the energy providers. The council doesn't have any involvement in that, and they just go ahead and do typically cheaper works than what I've been talking about earlier. So they'd be doing cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, that sort of thing. And then there's an additional variation of that called EcoFlex, and there is a requirement for Henry's team then to set the criteria, dictate the type of houses that we'd like to be helped through that scheme. But again, contractors then approach Henry's team for validation of their applications, but they will then go ahead and provide cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, that type.
Before you move on,
Ian, yes.
Ian, a lot of those schemes, I suppose the question for me is, are they household income driven, or are there limitations on what's available for people? Because I think obviously we need to help those most in need, but with the current energy prices, and I speak from personal experience of £130 a week on energy at the moment, because I have complications within my household, which means that my gas, water bills, water heating is particularly well used, etc. Are there schemes available that could help people in a similar situation?
That's a good point, and Henry might be able to help with the second bit. First part of the answer is pretty much everything I've talked about so far for those households that have £31,000 or less.
Right, yeah.
So you're right, we've been concentrating on the most needy households, but that's a real issue for us, Chair, in that I really worry about the households like all of us around this table who are in work and earning. We're probably not therefore eligible for those schemes. And how do we tempt people who are in work to go out and spend 10, possibly £15,000 on their house in a capital lump sum? It's a tough thing to do, and we're looking at different schemes. Possibly the council could put some money into those that could target those types of slightly less vulnerable financially households. You're right, it's a real challenge.
It is a lot of money when you're looking at new window installations or new things or whatever. And I think that there is a gap there between the very wealthy that wouldn't blink an eyelid, those that we are obviously trying to help best we can to get into, and Derby Homes residents are very, very lucky indeed, because we have an excellent project of support there in terms of new front doors, windows and roofing and insulations, etc. That's really positive, and that's absolutely right. But there is a gap in there, I think, where people are struggling and those bills are high because of they don't have that pot of money. They don't want to risk borrowing at this particular point in time when everything's up and in the air, and there's those risks out there. And I do think it does put a lot of pressure, and I just think it's something that we should consider as a whole, not just either end of the spectrum. Sorry, I'll let you come back and then I'll go to Councillor Andrew.
One thing we have done is across the local authorities, across D2 and N2, we've taken soundings, and they all share our concern on this issue. We've bid into the LGA, the Local Government Association, who've provided us £20,000 to employ a consultant to look at how a loan scheme could be rolled out across the D2 N2 area, and that loan scheme would be to target the groups just identified.
Which would be specifically for
absolutely
energy, climate change implications of energy efficiency.
So how do we get people in work to put solar PVs on for better insulation, more efficient, all of those things? The £20,000 will obviously only pay for the consultant to come up with a scheme and a loan scheme that would be compliant with the FSA. But nevertheless, it would then mean if the government got a lot of money, as they have been doing recently, we'd have a sort of oven-ready scheme chair that we can just roll out straight away. I don't know if you want to add to that in terms of how we might handle it.
I mean, all the projects that we've done up till now, the eligibility criteria are given to us by BASE. And so if you want to take advantage of it, it has to have a certain level, so it has to have a certain EPC, you know, there's a certain level of income, 31,000 that has to be complied with. So we have to ensure all of that, otherwise we end up with the council being liable for anything that we've done and not complied with. So yeah, and we're not finding any difficulty finding those. I mean, surprisingly easy at £31,000 for a household income. And you know, the material, the numbers of those houses, if you look in other areas of the city, just there's that much material to go on. But yeah, take it on. Who's taking it on? There are those people that will. This rate will never qualify for anything.
Yes.
And how do we encourage, you know, some improvement around there? I think what Ian says, I think we need to take some advice about what would help people make those decisions, you know, and the loan scheme potentially we could offer.
Councillor Pandy, sorry.
I got two questions. I don't know if you can help with these two questions. You talked about Mackworth's work. So about the Mackworth, the insulation work which is going on, that's my ward. Is it on time and is it within the budget, or is it like, you know, because I don't know, when was it expected to finish? Is it within the budget?
Yes, I mean, it really has to be pretty much. We get a certain amount of property from the government, and anything over and above that, we've made some provision for from previous projects that we've run. It's all got to be finished by a set timetable that the government have given us, which is currently at the end of April, extended it by a month.
Okay, because it seems like he's planning to extend it further than that. But then the scrutiny of the work, the standard of the work completed by contractor, is council checking that and making sure that. The other question was what I'm coming across in my ward. Lots of these bungalows got asbestos where the bins, the current meters are there. And obviously government wants to go them onto smart meter. And the problem what's happening is that the energy company doesn't want to put a smart meter because they will have to remove the asbestos. And Derby Homes, being the owner of those property, they are not going to do it as well. So it's a limbo kind of situation. Who's going to do it? And how it will happen, because the occupants want to go on smart meter. Because of this fiasco, or because of this problem, they can't. So is this something which you can look into? Or I don't know, if there is money available, a pot, money available.
I suppose from an external person looking in, asbestos isn't, I mean, I had it in my home until my house flooded, I didn't know. And there is a lot of asbestos in a lot of homes, and the message has always been, if it's left well alone, it's not a problem. So I suppose if there is these cases where people are needing to move them in order to install these smart devices, which will ultimately help with the climate change agenda and trying to support that, I'm sure that's something that, you know, the Derby Homes will look to support, I would hope.
Yeah, Chair. If are they all done? Either refer them to Derby Homes or Brian Lee to Derby Homes, because you're right, Chair. I think we would like to look at that, and there might be particular circumstances where it is impossible. But I think if we can possibly do something, I'm sure support those houses. So do refer to us.
Thank you.
Take that one offline, Councillor.
Yeah, I just thought like when discuss, yeah, you know, so is there something available because that will help a lot of elderly residents in the ward.
I know from myself having a smart meter, I'm turning off the lights everywhere I go to try and get that. So
I'll tell you what problem was happening with a lot of the people is that because everything has gone up and they don't know how much they're spending.
Yes.
And this is why the smart.
And they're nervous about it.
Yeah. The gentleman was very nervous, and he had switched off all his heating because he didn't know how much he was consuming.
Yeah, we're hearing a bit of that as well.
Yeah, so I went to him, I said,
Just
don't do that.
putting it on.
Heating on.
Yeah,
Yeah, so, yeah.
dangerous, isn't it? Especially our vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Ian, we kind of interrupted you there in flow. Was there more to this report?
Not really, Chair. Just thinking about your comments in relation to the previous reports. I'm just picking on the social economic implications. As we've discussed, we are helping the fuel poor with this because, as we discussed, it's households with a household income less than £30,000.
Do we have a list? Sorry, it's just whilst we're on this, it's just come to my brain. It happens on occasion. Do we have a list of preferred suppliers for things like this in the city that are local suppliers and things like that? Because I think that's what people would be keen across. You know, you talk about trying to encourage people to make that step and do it. Often it's a case of, oh, I'm not sure if I'm confident in the market and who's out there, and are they going to be good? Are they going to do the job properly? Do we have something in Derby that helps with social economic implications in terms of keeping it local, supporting local businesses, but also helps people to, is there a standard of, yes, these have got great reviews, or, you know, is that something that we as a council help with?
Buy with confidence for the city and the trusted trader.
Okay.
So we've all been vetted by trading standards, you know, and reviews and things like that, but done some independent verification of them. There are insulation contractors on there as well, so they are available. The sort of contractors that we're using are not really, they're more interested in more of the corporate
yeah.
client. Yeah. But there are some slightly larger ones. I had a look to see who's on that list, and the ones I recognise, obviously, I don't know. But they were ones that we'd had good experiences with that were on that.
And they're on trusted traders.
Yes, they'll buy with confidence. One's the city councils, one's the county council scheme, but they're very much the same thing. And they're all local contractors.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, I think I was just going to come to that. The ones in terms of the land schemes I was talking about, there is such pressure in the industry with all of these councils now getting this going. There's a real pressure on the industry in terms of capacity. And so our contractors, yes, we're using currently, if I'm honest with you, they're from South Yorkshire, so I can't say they're local. It is just a reality of, to try and find a good contractor, you have to go where they are, really, don't you? So it was either that, or we just wouldn't get anything delivered within the government time.
Understood.
Yeah. And that was it, Chair, in terms of the report.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before we move on? No? Lovely. Okay, so I think we are then down to the final item of the evening prior to our work programme. And guess what, Mr. Ian Polliger? It's you again.
Empty homes. So apologies from Sue Lee. You'll remember Sue did a presentation to this board earlier in the year. She can't be with us tonight, but she has produced this update report. Essentially, the report is saying that we are continuing to deliver the service. We're on track to meet our target of directly intervening and bringing 78 empty homes back into use. But in addition to those 78 where we get very directly involved, we do this big data checking exercise every year, and Sue's team have led that. And that's important, that every year we go out and look at those properties that are being declared as empty on the council tax list, because we do find every year that a number of them aren't empty. And if we can prove that they're actually occupied, that impacts on our new homes bonus figure that gives us chair. So that's an important bit of work. We've done that in the last quarter since your last update. That's important. As the report says, because of the pressure on council resources, obviously Sue's team have been looking at how they can drive down their costs, and we have come up with a new process whereby traditionally we would always go to our consultant as we went down the road of a CPO. So as we were CPO, and even fairly straightforward properties, we'd always engage our legal consultants. Our new process is that in straightforward cases, we are going to do those in-house, Chair, rather than going to MP law. They're excellent solicitors, they provide a really good service, but just purely financially, we get to make that change. And we estimate that that will deliver us a saving of at least £3,500 a year. It's not much, but we're all doing our bit, Chair. And then, sorry to finish on a slightly down note, Chair, the government's figures have come out in relation to the number of empty homes that we all have across the country. Our figures have increased by 4%. That is exactly in line with the national average, Chair. It's disappointing, but I should say that's in the context of an East Midlands increase of 7%. And when you look at Leicester, their increase is 27%, Nottingham 19%, Chesterfield 8%.
We're
Suddenly
relatively
we're
low in
relatively
comparison to
low, Chair, yeah, but clearly we'd rather not see any. 4% equates to about 50.
What do you think that that's because of? What's the indicators of why that potentially is increased?
It's hard to say. We have got a smaller team, Chair, than we used to have, but it's hard to say at this stage whether that is having an impact. I think the economic climate is having an impact, and I think clearly the cost of building materials has increased very significantly, as you all be aware, and the types of people that we deal with as empty homes are very often just small people like us who have inherited a property or something like that, and suddenly a big increase in building costs or even difficulty employing a builder can delay property being brought back into use. And I think some of it is also around softening the housing market. And there are people now just sitting on empty homes thinking, I'll wait 6 months and see if the market lifts.
I think that was my challenge, really. Are we at that stage at the moment?
I think we're seeing that, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Pandy first, and then you, Councillor Pons.
So the empty house, the owner, do they produce higher council tax or lower council tax if the property is empty?
I believe it's higher.
So when the property is empty, they pay higher tax. So we have come across a situation where owner owns a house, lives in Derby Homes, keeps this property empty. Okay, and you said that we have an increase of 4%. Do you mean Derby City Council by that?
Yeah, across the city. So there's 4% increase, and that I think it works out an additional 56 homes. City have become empty.
Which is sad when there's people out there desperate for homes, and I think that's the message.
It's not a massive number.
It's not a massive number, no, but it's still a number of houses that could be better used.
I don't think there would ever be
There'll never be none.
scenario. No, I don't think so. That's
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, Ian, I'm going to remind you of something.
Yes.
You know what I'm going to
Yes.
say. So it was just something that, Chair, I would personally like the team to start looking at not just empty homes, but stalled sites. There's one in my ward, long-standing issue. I'm being selfish to a degree, but I'm sure there may be others as well. It's where somebody's attempted to build, whether it be a business or commercial enterprise or a private individual, and it stalls for many years. It could be that it's just an empty site with some bricks on the side of it. It could be that it's got foundations, as is in this case, and nothing else is happening. I would like the council to look towards the purchase of those sites, because I believe that working with Derby Homes and or other partners, we could actually deliver some of the services that we need within these sites. And I think it's an opportunity for us to look into. So again, I just ask if we can explore that. I know it's a lot more complicated than a house that can be refurbished and brought back into use fairly quickly. A lot more complex, probably costly. However, think in the long run, it would really spend to save, because these sites in the city, some of them have significant potential to deliver on some of the things that we find extremely difficult to manage in terms of pressure, financial pressures on us in terms of social care, specialist care, mobility, properties with mobility alterations, those kind of things, which are really hard to come by. So again, I'm just asking if you could look into that, because I think it would be certainly a positive. And if you want to talk to me specifically about that particular site, I can remind you of it and we can have a look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think on that note, just another question really is, of those empty properties and those long-standing empty properties, have there been any orders?
We haven't made any in the last quarter, but it is something it is always ongoing.
Yeah.
And typically bring forward a CPO report 2 or 3 times. I'm just thinking through the maths in my head. We typically bring a report forward 2 or 3 times a year. Each one has 3 or 4, 5. So I would think we're doing about 4 or 5 CPOs each year, where they go all the way through the process. As you know, yeah. Often the cabinet resolution is enough. Drive
just push that
to do.
And I think that's, again, I know that legal fees are can be a challenge, but I think sometimes even those letters, that initial letter of this could be the case. What are you planning to do with these properties? Because it's important to get as many empty homes in use. We don't want to keep receiving, because I think it's up to 200% business council tax rates, isn't it? If they're empty for a period of time. But what we've also got to be careful of, and like you've said before, we've got a lot of people who say they're in use, but actually, are they in use? What is the criteria for use? I visit once a month and empty my bin. That's not in use in my view. Right, so I think that's it on the agenda. Any other questions? We've got one more item which I don't think we can really change at this moment. It's the work programme. Item 9, the work programme is pretty much finished. Apart from our next meeting, we can't move anything around because that's the only meeting we've got. So it's a pretty standard item as it stands at the moment. The only question for me is there are quite a number of items on that meeting. Would we like to consider bringing it forward the meeting forward half an hour so that we're not here too late? Or are you all happy to stick with a 6 o'clock rather than a 5:30?
I've already sent my apologies for that meeting, so 2 o'clock in the afternoon if you want.
I'm not having it.
What date is it, Nicola?
It is the 7th of March, isn't it?
No, it doesn't matter to me.
Not too worried.
Should be fine. Plenty of notices.
Either or, yeah. Should we potentially put that in for 5:30 then? Just so that we've I'm conscious of officer time. You've all been at work all day and it's not very fair to keep you to this length of time. So at least if you can get half an hour early, your team might not be completely in the dog, as mine is this evening. Yes, I think that's the end of this meeting. Thank you. Thank you for everybody's attendance.
Thank you.